I remember that the all-purple gecko was one of the holy grails in leopard gecko breeding. People were telling me all the years, oh, Rebecca, forget it. It's too much work. You will never get an all-purple gecko. And that was my goal. So I didn't care. And after 5 to 6 years, you could see the progress. Bam, bam, bam. After generation, they just doubled in their coloration. And just when I thought it couldn't come any better, I looked in the incubator, and I never forget this day. And I screamed so loud that everybody in the house was coming because they thought I had an accident. A purple gecko looked back at me.
How to breed leopard geckos is probably one of the more commonly searched phrases for people who are experienced in the hobby enough to want to take it to the next step. Obviously, leopard geckos being one of the more common pets out there. Today's guest is a very familiar face to the podcast. That is Rebecca Hassler of Dragoon Gecko, and we discuss everything you need to know about breeding leopard geckos. Again, this is a long episode because it's a topic that requires a lot of discussion. Nothing against the other videos that are out there discussing how to breed leopard geckos, but you will not find enough information in most of those videos. The information in this podcast will give you everything you need to know in order to do this successfully. And if you're not somebody who's working with leopard geckos specifically, this is an episode that will still be of high value to you because you can almost replace the word leopard gecko throughout the episode with any other species, especially if it's a species where you're trying to work with morphs or other color mutations, because we do spend some time talking about how to make sure you do that properly as well. This is the third episode we've recorded with Rebecca. If you want to listen to the other two, I'll make sure that they're in the show notes as well. Let's jump into the episode. Enjoy. This podcast is all about improving your reptile husbandry. However, I know not everybody has the time or the money to go out and spend thousands of dollars doing custom builds. Thankfully, friend of the podcast, Josh Halter, aka the Bio Dude, is working hard to make better care more accessible. He makes turnkey bioactive kits for leopard geckos, ball pythons, tortoises, invertebrates, dart frogs, and the list continues to grow. He has spent years testing and perfecting these handcrafted substrates and dietary supplements to create the most effective products. If you visit thebiodude.com, you will see he is a proud supporter of both USARK and responsible reptile keeping, and there is an option to donate to either at checkout. Well, Rebecca, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for being here again.
Thank you so very much for having me, Dylan. It's always a pleasure and privilege being here.
Yeah, we love having you on, and I think the first time we did an episode, we had comments saying, when's part 2, and then we did another episode, and then we had comments, when's part 3, so I'm sure we'll get comments, when is part 4 after doing this one, so there's just so much to extract from you because you're a very detailed person, as I always say when we talk, but for this episode, we're almost doing this in reverse. The first 2 episodes were really in the weeds, the sort of more advanced type of reptile breeding path, as well as focusing on leopard geckos. And today there'll be a lot of elements to do with that, but we want to kind of go back to the basics and give people the tools and the foundation to actually pull this off. So we'll be mostly talking about leopard geckos today, of course, because that's your expertise, but a lot of these concepts can easily be transferred to other species as well, for sure.
Sure.
Why don't we start with just, again, if people aren't familiar with you, who you are and your experience?
Oh, thank you. I have to admit first and beforehand that this episode has made me more nervous than all the other episodes before because it's the basics. I'm very, very good at details. And if you're doing it for such a long time than I have, then you're so used to certain things that you don't even think about them. They are running automatically in your mind and in your muscle, called muscle memory. So I made my notes, and sometimes in order to give our audience the quality and the structure they expect and deserve from the last episodes, I will take a quick glimpse on them from time to time to make sure I handle everything correctly here. But yeah, for those who have missed the other episode and don't know who I am and what I do, my name is Rebecca. I'm a European breeder. I'm specialized in breeding leopard geckos exclusively since 2007. So you could say that breeding leopard geckos is something that I've dedicated my life to. And it's always a pleasure talking about my experiences and, have discussions about breeding, keeping everything around leopard geckos, what we do so far and what we can do better in the future. So.
Okay. And I think it's also worth saying for because leopard geckos are quite a popular pet, they're sort of popular just by virtue of the fact that a lot of box pet stores carry them. But because of that, there's a lot of people that look down on them. Oh, leopard geckos, the ball pythons, leopard geckos, bearded dragons. I don't want to keep one of those because it's just too common. Can you quickly give us an argument for why leopard geckos do actually make an excellent pet?
Oh, that's an excellent question and the perfect start. Leopard geckos are so fascinating, as you can probably see. And this fascination has, taken over my mind for over 15 years now, and for very, very good reason. Leopard geckos, first of all, they are not just only look at reptile. So they are very, very interactive. And I have rarely seen a species that is considered not so intelligent as monitors that still expresses such a variety of different characteristics and exploring behavior. Most of them are curious. Some of them are very, very intelligent. We also talked about in previous episodes how you can shape this and use that to your advantage, as I have. I have bred some lines to the point where they not only are naturally tame, but they really seek human interaction and they were really curious. And that's also what some of my clients have experienced and talked about in other podcasts. So the info is out there. If you want to know more about that, Google the previous Animals at Home episodes, and I'm sure you will find tons of info there. So when, this is really interesting to you, on top of that, they come in a vast variety of colors and patterns. There's almost nothing that can't be done and has been done. Like the ball pythons, there is something for everybody's taste. But they're not only stunning and really interactive and also very curious and nice to handle. They're also very hardy compared to other reptiles. So no matter if you're a first-time reptile keeper or someone who wants to breed with a more advanced mindset, the leopard geckos will give you definitely enough room to fulfill both needs. So there's something in for everybody. And
Yes.
the more I work with them, the more I see how many things we are still, even grasping and are at the beginning of understanding.
Yeah. And I love the fact that a lot of times something like a leopard gecko or a ball python will act as a gateway to get into reptile breeding because it's a simpler species to work with, let's say, and then people use it as a stepping stone to advance into another, maybe more complicated species to breed. But I love the fact that you actually just stuck with it and you're actually finding that there are so many layers to leopard gecko, something that we would quote unquote call a simple animal to breed and work with, that is so far beyond the just that base level of husbandry that we kind of think when we think of leopard geckos. But you have to stick with it. You have to stick with the project for long enough to start uncovering these layers. And one thing I would also add to that as a benefit is leopard geckos stay small. They're not a huge species. They're not a lizard that's going to take up a bedroom. They are really a very good candidate for keeping as a pet.
And also, fun fact, I think first and foremost, we have to be aware that you can have a species for 1 or 2 years and you can get bored with them. You can have them for 10, 20, 30 years and you still, can get something valuable out of them emotionally wise and intellectual wise. It all depends on your mindset, whether you're truly ready diving into the needs and truly trying to understand your species. I think that's not only for leopard geckos, that goes for every species. And on the other flip side, of course, I have also had my little side projects over the last 15 years. And I also have kept and bred some other species. But on the contrary to what I expected, I didn't make the experience that social media always provides, like, oh, you start with leopard geckos and once you get bored of them, then you step into something else and it will be even better and also better to sell because there's less offer on the market. Yes, there's also less demand. Think about that. I don't know, 50, 60% on the whole reptile potential buyers, they are ready for a leopard gecko or ball python. They're not ready for a big I don't know, Varanus or a species that requires really expensive and advanced needs. So I don't say that leopard geckos are for everybody. I don't also say that other species are not fun, but I've made the experience that it can be really rewarding, and that brought me back to leopard geckos every time. It's just a species that is easy to get into, but hard to master. So
Yes.
it has enough room for you to explore the master level. It can get really tricky, and it makes so much fun. Friendly, competing with others and exchanging informations about their genetics and useful informations about them, and also contributing on improving the species and making them better and healthier. So this is something that I would have never expected when I got into them, and that now in reverse, before we start into that, I can really, give as a tip to the audience. If you thought leopard geckos are boring, think again and use this episode as a great chance to dive a little bit into what makes them really exciting.
Yes, yeah, that is very well said, so I think let's set the tone for this episode because they are such a common species and they're very, very prolific in the hobby. You could find a million videos about how to breed leopard geckos, how to care for leopard geckos, and I think I'm not saying any disparaging against the current videos that are out there. There's probably some great ones. There's probably some that are lacking information, but it's something that is covered a lot, but probably not anywhere near the detail that we're able to do today. So is there anything you want to add to that before we jump in?
Yes, sure. As always, my breeding and the work that I do at Dragoon Gecko is always focused on an ethic breeder standpoint. So we are, whatever I'm trying to do in the episodes, we will discuss and focus on doing it ethically correct, with the right mindset, and responsible towards ourselves and towards the animals. So this is something that I really, really want to emphasize before we go on. This is not a talk to convince everybody to now get leopard geckos and start reproducing them, because as you said, we come to the point probably in the next questions that we are dealing with a market that is already saturated. So there are great ways to make sure you're producing beautiful offspring that you can sell in good homes, and that's exactly what we want to focus on today.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So let's talk about just getting ourselves set up for success. And obviously, we covered this a lot in the last two episodes. So if anyone is listening to this part of the conversation and they want to get into more depth, definitely listen to episode 1 and episode 2. And I'll make sure that's all in the show notes for people because we do get into that. But obviously, selecting the right animals is so key. You can't just run to the pet store and pick up 2 leopard geckos and start if you want to do it properly. So how do we make sure we're set up for success breeding stock wise?
That is the biggest and most important question, I think, on the whole podcast. And this is the first bitter pill we need to swallow here. So success in breeding actually starts long before you even get your very first pair of leopard geckos. I highly recommend that you are open on getting reliable informations in the first place. So there are a lot of great books, and why printed medium is always preferred to any other mediums is because it is easy to, do a YouTube video and promote yourself as an expert. You don't need to prove those claims. And we are, as a consequence, provided with many excellent information, but also very false informations. So besides of responsible podcasts like yours, who very carefully filter the people they are working with, I highly recommend or would like to recommend. I'm not getting paid for this, so this is no advertising. It's just experience. I would like to really, give a tip on 2 books that I personally really recommend. The first is for the German market. This is Der Leopard Gecko und seine Farbformen. This is also a book where you can find lots of my projects that are rarer, like the Ghost or the Albase, and they are discussed there in detail. Maybe some of the audience also knows German, so this is a great book to go for. But the true book and the Bible is sure Ron Tramper's Leopard Geckos. This book is available also in online form, and it offers you a wealth of information. You can check back, if you hear something also in this podcast, whether it's correct or not, and you have the security. So I think this mindset is the first 50% of settling successfully into leopard or any reptile breeding. Get a clear understanding, where do I get my informations and which informations are secure. So this is the first thing. The second thing is to realize that getting your first pair of leopard geckos or deciding on your 2 future breeders, because that's not the same, is an act of careful planning and making responsible decisions. So probably most of the ones who are listening here, they already have leopard geckos and they're like, oh, great, I always want to go into breeding. So which of my geckos should I pick? So the first bitter pill to swallow is that we need to make a really careful evaluation whether we have breeding quality or pet quality geckos, meaning that there are certain characteristics that are essential for the gecko's well-being from an animal welfare standpoint, from an marketing and selling standpoint, and you need to be aware of those and make a careful decision and, not rush into by taking the next 2 geckos you can get your hands off, but really thinking about, what do I want to achieve? And this is a hard question because beginners mostly don't know what they want to achieve. That's a really good question. You should think carefully about that. And second, what should I contribute? What can those geckos that I like contribute to the next generation? Because it's not about, and we have talked about this in previous episodes, responsible breeding is not about reproducing and getting more geckos. It's about contributing to the next generation and making sure we do everything in our power to get vital, healthy, and beautiful offspring.
Yes. Yeah, that is perfectly said. And I think because there is this, it is so exciting to move into a breeding project. It's a fun thing. People get, the opportunity to do something different with their reptiles and advance their skill set. But you do have to be very careful that you're not jumping to the excitement of the breeding without really establishing a foundation. Like why are you going to produce these specific animals? And I've told a story before on the podcast. I originally wanted to start breeding boas just because I had 2 of them. And this was years ago, like almost probably a decade ago now. And I realized, as exciting as that was, I didn't know what I was going to do with the litter. I don't live in a huge community. There's not a whole bunch of reptile keepers, and I could deal with 20 or 30 babies. It didn't make sense to add more boas to the local environment that I currently lived in. So I just had to pump the brakes, and I'm glad that I never did that because I don't think it would have been a great idea. But it is tempting when you have a male and a female to just create more.
Exactly. And I just heard from your experience a bunch of questions and things that pop up in my mind right now. So really deciding what is the best way to get started actually takes so much time and careful planning. First of all, you need to look into the market. You have to get an overview of what's available on morph-wise and on physical characteristics that you like. You have to get a rough overview on their value, because this will help you to evaluate whether, it is really wise to breed 20 bucks gecko that you can hardly sell and resell, or maybe something that is more, still appropriate for your funding, but ensures you that the animal is in higher demand and, is having better chances to get a good home, because that's what it is. It's not about getting the most money for an animal. It is, for those that have listened to the last episodes, we also talked briefly about this. I have been studying veterinary medicine for some years. I haven't finished, but what you learn there in the clinics when you're going into the practical thing of reptile health is that you see that the geckos, the leopard geckos that are coming to the clinics, those are not the lower end geckos. Those are mostly, not in every case, but mostly valuable animals. So we owe it to our animals that they get the attention, the care, and the medical care and everything that they need, basically.
Yeah.
So there is few ways where we can ensure this, because once I sell one of my geckos, it is leaving my hands, and therefore it is leaving my power to control everything for this gecko. So the only thing that I can make sure that my gecko has a good start is asking a price where it is too valuable to not to go to the doctor. So this has helped me tremendously. This was something, once I understood it, once I accepted it, I don't think it's fair. I think every animal deserves the same care. And I'm doing this for my animals. And I also know many other people who thinking the same way and provide great care to their animals. But we have to be realistic and look out into the whole world. And if we do that, we will see that outside our closest friends and the responsible people that we know, it is always a good idea to be prepared and just set the start right, so the animal has the best chances.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. So basically, we could go on about this step for hours and hours, because this is something that I, cover in detail in my coaching sessions for people who are starting and asking me, hey, what do I should get started with? It's not a good idea to just pick some high-end morph and it's like, oh, Black Knights, they are in, they're on vogue, I should go with these. I don't think that this is really, a path to success. You should really pick something that you like, that speaks to you, but still, with a good picture in mind, what you're going into and what you can work out of that in the next generations, or what you should do to ensure that you can at least hold the quality or bringing the geckos to a high quality. Because what we see in the last years, sadly, is that outside the top breeders, which always produced and always will produce stunning and beautiful animals, the majority on the market, sees a quality decline. We are having a drop in quality over quality on some very common morphs, and this really concerns me. So this was also the reason why I think this podcast is hopefully helpful, and why I wanted to do it. I wanted to give you the inspiration and the tools that you need to make the right step in the right first steps in the right direction, and training your eye for quality, and hopefully contributing to bringing back leopard gecko morphs in the mass, in the numbers, to the old glory days that we've seen 10 years ago.
Yes, yeah. And do you want to quickly run through some of the characteristics that you use to differentiate between a breeding stock and a breeding quality animal and a pet quality animal? Because like you said, that was a perfect scenario where somebody probably has 2 pet leopard geckos, and if they want to breed them, what should they be looking for if this makes sense to go forward with?
Sure. So, of course, it is a little bit more complex, but for the beginners, I always like to break it down into 3 categories. We are looking for health first, then we're looking second for genetics, and third for temperament. I think the health part is almost self-explanatory. So we are looking for a gecko that doesn't have any flaws in his anatomy, that is a very robust animal that has grown steadily and has been a good eater. This is also why record keeping is very important. We come to this on a later point. But now, for now, let's just say a breeder quality animal is one that excels in all of these categories, not just one. It is a very robust and healthy animal first, that seconds displays its morph in a very, very high standard with nice colors and clear markers, so that you can easily identify it as belonging to that line or that project. For example, a line-bred snow that is totally yellow. is not producing high quality offspring, or having a group of them and breeding them over generations without trying to getting them where they belong is not making much sense. So when you're dealing with line-bred snows, no matter which variety you choose, we have 3 of them, by the way, the always, the tuck, and the gems, you should consider that the word snow implies whiteness, brightness. So what we want is an animal that is as white as possible. So that doesn't mean we need to go for the 2 or 3K gecko. It just means that we need to be aware in the back of our minds and now select from those 5 or 6 animals that are robust and healthy and pass the quality, the first column of health. We need to pick now the ones who have the clearest markers of this desired trait that we want to work with. And also, and here comes the tricky part, you don't go in the pet store and select a snow and start breeding, or a tangerine and start breeding, or you don't just go on Morph Market and pick the one you like. Why? Because the genetics, the second part, they play a major role in how those animals not only display the qualities, but more importantly, are able to pass them to the next generation, to your offspring that you're preparing for, that you want to bring into the world. So choosing the animals carefully from someone who exactly knows what he's doing, can give you the exact genetics, and can ensure that those animals are bred, selectively bred for many generations to give you what you need, is crucial. Pet store geckos often carry undesired traits. They are often double head or triple heads for stuff that is very closely, together, or they are crossed max nose with line-bred snows. They cross different albino strains. So at that point, you should be able to also know before you purchase an animal what the forbidden crosses are and how to avoid them. You also do not want to choose any mutations that cause physical or mental problems and diseases with your animals. I think that is also a really important factor that we need to discuss. And third, if your gecko passes those 2 categories and is a healthy animal from a reliable breeder who knows what he's, giving to you, and who makes sure that you're getting exactly what you need to get started, you're looking for temperament. In general, I always prefer, of course, that's what I've been known for in the last 5 years at least, I always prefer calm and gentle and curious leopard geckos. Why? Because in the color morph section, we will never introduce those animals back to the wild. So their natural environment, so to speak, are the terrariums, and they will require human action. So an animal that is relaxed, that loves to see you, that loves to interact with you, has less stress to almost zero stress, can live a stress-free, happy life, and will, interact with you, and you will feel happier. The gecko will feel happier. So this is also great responsibility, and something that you, as the breeder or soon-to-be breeder, can control. So you see, before you're even starting out, before you've even made other plans, you're now standing here and have this mountain before you, and you have to go through it and, wisely make your choice and take your time. Do not rush, and also don't make the, beginner's mistake to buy too many animals at once. Start really slow. If you really want to give it a try, you just need one breeding project, one group, a male and 2 females. That's enough. You don't need 10, 20, 50 geckos. It's not about hoarding. It's about the quality that is important.
Yes. Yeah. And so long story short, your 2 geckos that you have at home probably are not the candidates for your beginning of your breeding project, because more than likely you didn't go through that process. So I think a much more effective way to actually start the foundation properly is going out and finding juveniles from breeders, and you can kind of start checking those lists, those 3 points off, and you're bringing those juveniles into your home and raising them and bringing them into breeding age, and then working with those animals. Plus, that gives you a much better idea of their temperament too as you grow and work with them. So why don't we take that version, somebody who's a little bit more patient, going through this a little bit more methodically and deciding, hey, I want to breed in a couple of years, so right now I'm going to start with some juveniles. What are some tips there?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to end this with, if it helps, with the little fact that around 80% to 90% of the animals that I produce every season, I do not consider good enough to go into my own breeding program. So, you have to be very selective, and this is natural, and this is just a normal thing for a breeder. That doesn't mean that those animals who are not suited to be breeders are not beloved pets. They can make excellent pets. I have many of them at home and I enjoy them. I just decide not to reproduce them. But let's go to the next steps, of course. If you are having some juveniles and you acquire them, of course, first you need to learn about proper quarantine. I think this is really important. At least 3 months at a very simple setup with paper towel so that you can easily see their stool. You can take fecal samples and you should send them to a specialized laboratory or your reptile vet so he can do this for you. You have to test for some really serious issues, including cryptosporosis at first, which is a deadly disease and, can rip apart whole collections. So another very good reason to buy from a respected breeder and not rushing into it. It is like HIV a little bit in geckos. Of course, it's a totally different thing, but it is an immune suppressing disease that is really nasty and that is unfortunately not really curable up to date at this point. So you also want to check for external and internal parasites. And once you've done that, you also have 3 months of, just observing them. As you said, getting to know their behaviors, getting to know their feeding priorities and schedules. And once you've done that, of course, you have to take care on 3, again, major parts. One is feeding, the second is environment, and the third is tracking of data tracking. So first of all, I want to, as always, with all my animals, I want to provide them with healthy and varied diet. So leopard geckos are insect eaters. They do not eat anything else than insects. But what we can do is we can gut load the insects with a variety of, stuff like carrots, broccoli, salad, fresh vegetables of all kinds. And of course, also some, dog food as a base, as a stable base. Some use chicken mesh. I personally prefer with the quality pet food because I think it's, more controlled or in a higher quality. But this is something where you can thrive, where you can really find out what your feeders benefit from. Carrots are always a great choice because they have the perfect phosphorus calcium ratio. So especially if you're having sophobas or mealworms, you really want to make sure you're giving them lots of carrots to compensate, especially in the mealworm, the not so perfect ratio of phosphorus and calcium. So why do we need that? We need that for proper bone growing. We need it for a strong and healthy and perfect skeleton. So make sure that you not only provide your leopard geckos with a good loaded variety of different feeder insects, but also make sure that you're offering always calcium powder and vitamin powder in a little lid at all times. They're one of the species where you can't really overdose. They take what they want, and it has worked out great. So many breeders are doing it, and you prevent a lack of calcium and a calcium deficit, especially in growing females when they ovulate. Of course, then if the whole reproduction system gets in motion, then there is a phase where they really, really need more calcium. So you can easily cover that with a good feeding schedule. For the environment, after you have done your quarantine, of course, I personally recommend, as a EU breeder, we are by law committed to put them into terrariums, naturalistic terrariums, if possible. There are other breeders who are in US, especially in Asia, who breed them in recs. Whatever you do, make sure to understand their needs. They are nocturnal species. They need plenty of spaces to hide. They need a hot side. They need a cooler side. They need a temperature drop, or at least they greatly profit from that at night. This species comes from Pakistan, Afghanistan, India. So it's really, really telling if you Google pictures from that area, and then you can see, with a little bit of common sense, what your geckos need and what environment they really thrive in. For example, my leopard geckos, they love to climb, but of course, sometimes they overestimate their powers to do so. So I want to make sure that, I slowly, I build some rock foundations that they can easily manage, or some people have, made their own designs and made like a catwalk, like cat tree, some little, installments. The species is not really picky. They love to explore. And of course, you will see, and your focus always should be to observe your animal and to find out whether the current conditions you give them are suitable for them or not. If a leopard gecko does not really feel safe and secure, he will not really wander around, especially at night. He will have a tail wave, like a question mark. He will do this, movements with a head. He will be very shy, easy to get disturbed. Whether if he feels secure, mostly when you provide a nice back wall with a lot of, hiding opportunities, they love to come out and they stay there and like a little bit of sun or warm basking, especially at dawn, because they have that security that they can always, dive into their cave whenever they feel like, and that makes them more relaxed and more open. So always keep the animal in mind. Don't forget, with all readings and getting tips and getting inspiration, to really look at your animal and through observation, finding out what your animal really wants. I have some geckos that die for toilet paper, and I have some that hate it, that these toilet paper rolls.
Yeah.
So every gecko is different. That's what I said in the beginning. Their characteristics and their preferences vary a little bit. So in quarantine, I don't use toilet paper rolls except from quarantine, but this is also nice to see who likes it and who doesn't. And I have always different types of hides, so I can see and evaluate what this specific animal is looking for. So, and of course, take care of the proper heat, the humidity, and the hiding places in order to give your gecko the environment to thrive. And of course, tracing and tracking the behavior is vital. Especially as a beginner, you want to have an idea how often the leopard gecko is eating, if he's refusing food. Once that happens, is it just occurring one time over the first 3 weeks? And the quarantine section, do they just get adjusted to new food? Some breeders only use mealworms, so it can take a leopard gecko for a few days to figure out that a roach is a good prey item, but usually they're adapting soon. Or do you have an animal that seems to refuse a variety of foods and is not really interested, showing stress signs, etc. So the more you're making your notes at the beginning, the easier it is for you to come back to those notes and see pattern that can indicate a sickness, or patterns that are positive that you can compare with the offspring, for example, to find out which ones would be a good candidate for the next generations.
The best part about providing high-quality reptile husbandry is you get to develop a long-term relationship with your animal. Meet Jackson, my 18-year-old crested gecko. Jackson lives on the BioDudes Terrafauna substrate, which is one of their substrates that's specifically designed for warm biomes and humidity spikes. Like all other BioDudes substrates, it contains organic content to help support the plant life in Jackson's vivarium. It also holds moisture very well, which means humidity is never an issue, even in my dry climate. Another favorite of mine is the BioDudes Bug Grub. This is a supplement powder made from natural ingredients crops like carrots, beets, spirulina, oats, and potatoes. Everybody knows how important gut-loading feeder insects is, and this simplifies it for me and allows me to be confident when I feed both Jackson and my tarantulas that they're getting the nutrients they need to thrive. Also, if you have a lot of babies right now, this is a great way to help fortify the diets of neonatal reptiles. The BioDude has a ton of great educational content on both his YouTube channel and the website, all about bioactive care, and it's just one of those brands that's doing their part to push herpetoculture into a positive direction and give reptile keeping a better name. Right. So do you have how do you take your notes or your tracking? Do you do it electronically, or do you have like a binder with paperwork, or what do you do?
I'm really old-fashioned.
Me too. Yeah.
My husband, he wants to do everything, electronic, and I'm getting scolded a few times, or I see the head shaking, but I feel more. For me, it's easier, faster, and more creative to just have my little booklet and write down everything. And yeah.
So do you have do you make a table or something to fill out and then you print it out, or are you just like regular pen, like loose leaf paper with just the regular lines and just take notes?
Yeah, just take notes, and then I can go back and forth. And I also like to, as I say, I like to compare. Once you have done this for multiple stages in the breeding for several generations, it really gets, you really have a valuable library of behavioral patterns that you can go back to, and it helps you sometimes to understand what is normal, what is not normal, and it gives you a hint on early on problems that you can then approach in a better way.
Yeah. So why don't we quickly, are there certain red flags that you watch out for when we're talking about what, you have these animals that are developing in your collection and you're trying to decide if they're going to be breeders or not? What are some things that jump out right away where you just say, okay, this is going to be a pet and not a future breeder?
Okay. So, besides from the quarantine, where I really look at the stool and I want a stool fecal examination done to exclude all, potential illnesses or problems that are, have nothing to do with the genetics. If I look at outgrowing juveniles, I want to see animals that are growing at a steady rate. A good growing gecko is a healthy gecko. And in the most cases, also fertile gecko. So if you have females that are growing nicely and they're putting on weight and they do not look like a stick and they're starting to ovulate and they still have a decent weight, a little weight drop at this stage, as I said, is normal. Geckos that are not too picky eaters, that seem to rarely miss a meal, are animals that also in nature would thrive. And those are the animals that nature would select. And nature is, in the most cases, always right. So it's a good thing to also use a little bit of common sense, and tracking helps you identify those animals, because often, and this happens to everybody, me included, after over 15 years, sometimes you're so excited and get blinded by the beautiful colors and patterns that you totally forget about all other things that are important. So, and when you have a decent, data you can go back to and compare it, you will be able to see things that have not crossed your mind yet. So, for example, if I also see that an animal is easily stressed out in general because of everything, and it is not an wild type cross or wild type bloodline gecko, we will maybe go through this a little bit more in the next points. It can become tricky because they can pass these to their offspring, also aggressiveness. I want geckos that are healthy, that are growing, that are easygoing, that are friendly, open, curious, and not so easily stressed. So that I can visually see are thriving and are not having any problems. Those are the animals that I really love to consider for breeding.
Yeah, and you have to be so strict with yourself, because there's probably nothing more heartbreaking than see a beautiful juvenile that has incredible colors, and then it's the one that you struggle to get eating. It's the one that struggles to grow, and you probably just think, what if I just bred it this one time and then it's going to have offspring that are better, but it's just not worth the risk.
Every season. It happens to me every season. And once you're doing that, you're getting those genes into your gene pool and you don't know what is coming out of it. And it can also happen that, you end up 2 or 3 generations later with a dead end and produce animals that are not healthy at all or are constant troublemakers. And let me tell you, there's nothing more frustrating. It also can happen to a serious breeder with acquiring new blood and new stock, because remember, of course, we can't always use the same geckos in our collection, or we will have a problem with inbreeding depression. So in order to keep the collections healthy, I and all other breeders depend on buying animals from other breeders to, enrich our gene pools and setting a secure foundation of a healthy and robust line. And what happens there sometimes is that you have an animal that looks fine on the outside. Maybe it's a little bit skittish, but not really something to worry about. And then you can see in the offspring that somebody has not really selected them. But I have to say that happened to me in the earlier years, when I bought my geckos at, shows, and I wasn't really paying so much attention on the people behind it. And this has greatly changed in the last years, because over time you get a feeling on people who are doing this ethically and are passionate and as passionate as you are and are having good, strong, fertile lines. And yeah, this is definitely a change that I see, and also a good recommendation to think a little bit before and doing your research where to get the geckos from. Because nothing more sad and frustrating than to have beautiful geckos and bought them for a lot of money and then they're not thriving. It can also happen, in order to be fair, with the best breeder and the best bloodline. I mean, if you have 50 babies from one project, not all of the 50 babies will have the best of the best quality. And sometimes I also had that in my breeding program. I usually like to grow my animals out before I sell them to a certain extent, to reduce the risk. You can never tell with 10 or 15 or 20 gram animals, sometimes even 20, but 10 to 15 is the critical mark in my personal feeling, how they will grow in another breeder's care, simply because you don't know how the feeding schedule is, if they're housed together or whatever. So if a problem appears, you want to make sure that you can go back to that breeder. So in my case, my customers can count on me that they can and should always contact me when something isn't right and give me the chance to maybe get them and select them an animal that is better suited, because we are all, not oracles. We can do our best and we select to the best of our knowledge. But sometimes you can still just have bad luck. And so it's even more important to be aware of that and then at least have a decent source where you can, get back to.
Yeah. But if you do have something displaying that's not good, like you said, you could have the best animal that's displaying all the great characteristics, and it could still throw off offspring that are not going to fulfill your rules that you've set for yourself. So definitely don't start with an animal that's already checking red flag boxes. Yeah. Because you cannot reverse genetics out of that situation. It was like the other day I was playing with my son and we're playing with Play-Doh, and he had these 2 balls of Play-Doh that are different color, and he wanted to mix them, which is totally fine. But I'm telling him, once these are mixed, buddy, we cannot reverse out of this situation. You're no longer going to have yellow and blue. You're going to have whatever happens when we mix these 2 things. And genetics are the same way. You cannot get out of that situation. So if you have red flags, you just have to be strict with yourself and not move forward with the project, because it's just not worth the risk.
Perfectly said, Dylan. And also, like you said, if you're having beautiful foundation stock, which through your data proves to produce significantly weaker or not growing offspring over 2 or 3 seasons, it is not worth, continuing with that specific animal. So maybe getting back, making the breeder aware and getting replacement animals, and looking for the same morph but another breeding pair would be a wiser and better option than to struggle for years and years. You only do that when you have no other chance, like with almost extinct morphs. But this is something for master breeders, and it requires so much skill and so much time that I can't really recommend it. So for beginners, let's stay on the easy and the safe and secure road.
Yes. Now, what about as the juveniles are growing? When is the best time to sex them and to actually start figuring out what you have?
Mm. So when you bought your animals from the breeder, they will probably already been sexed.
Okay.
You can usually sex them around 6 to 8 weeks of age, the earliest. You will see the hemipenis bulges in the males and the preanal pores, which the females lack. But to be honest, also in my projects and bloodlines, I have different growth rates. Some grow a little bit faster than the others, and also the time of the year, also here in Europe at least, plays a huge contributing factor. The babies that hatch the latest, they of course don't get the luxury of the hot summer months, but more of the fall and the winter. So even if you're heating them up to perfection, somehow they seem to sense that it is not summertime. And it can happen that some of them are growing a little bit slower, but they're growing steady. So this is what I really want to keep track on, and be always aware when sexing geckos that it can vary a little bit from morph and from breeder to breeder. So don't stress yourself. I think at least at the 15-20 gram rate, that's a really safe and secure weight group to expect some visual markers for the one or the other.
So let's say someone's bought their juveniles. Now we've taken them through this stage. They've tracked them. They're healthy animals. They have a couple of pairs or a group of animals they want to work with. What's the next step? How do we know when the gecko itself is ready to breed? What are some things we watch for there?
This is another really crucial time where many accidents happen and many mistakes happen, and people sabotage their success. So for me personally, the three most critical points are the first two we already talked about. The first one is selecting the right breeding stock, getting your homework done before deciding which project you want to go into, and then checking whether what you have is suitable or not. Second is doing the quarantine very, thoughtfully and taking it seriously. And the third thing is, rushing animals into breeding. We don't want to do that. Why? Because it creates a bunch of problems that, as you said, we can't reverse. Young females, once they start ovulating, they are hardly ready to reproduce safely. Why? Because in nature, you could be eaten by a predator at any moment. So nature doesn't want animals and also us humans to live as long as we individually can. Nature doesn't want me to live a long and happy life. It just wants me to reproduce. Yes. And then I can go. So, I mean, of course, it's a little bit more complex like that. But if we keep that in mind, we see females ovulating. And as a good and responsible breeder, we know immediately it is not the time, to take her to a male. On the contrary, we want to keep sexes separate. We, of course, never want to house two males together because they will fight badly. So every male has to be kept separately. And a male has to be separated from females outside pairings and breeding season. So accidents shouldn't happen if you are considering yourself a responsible breeder, because there's an easy way to prevent that. Do not keep your male around with the females at all times of the year. Do not set young females to an older breeding group unless she has, all the qualifications, the age and weight markers that we talk about now, to safely do so. So you want your female, at least in my personal feeling, you want her to be at least 12 months old. Why? Because of course they're starting at 8 or 9 months ovulating, but pairing her too soon will result, and this also goes for males, and is a fact that is rarely talked about, even in podcasts. Young leopard geckos go through a growing stop. They will always look smaller and weaker in body language. Body structure, something happens with them when they are breeding too young. And interestingly, this also goes for the males. My biggest males are never the ones that are breeding, right when they approach breeding weight. they still need some time to grow and to mature. And same goes for the female. So if you
So
want
you're
to
saying that breeding early does for some reason stunt the growth later on down the road, or slow the growth to a point where it's
yes,
noticeable.
yes, and to a point where they never fully recover. So it
Fascinating.
might be that they are, still growing a little bit, but they never recover fully. So please don't do that. You're doing no good to your animals. And this is not what we are talking about here. We are all about, you know, working with the animals. So take your time. Also, breeding males, some pair them up with 6 months. I think that is, for me personally, it's too early. I wait for them, and I usually, like them to be 10 to 12 months as well. This has proven for me personally to be a good date. I know other breeders might see things different, and I don't judge them. It's just what I do and what works for me. And remember, I'm also in Europe. I know US is a big country. You have different climate zones, and especially when you're in the same situation, also over there in Canada, winters can be pretty cold, so it could be a big advantage if you're living in a climate zone that is similar to mine in Germany, to just give them a little bit more time, let
Mm-hmm.
them grow. The females should be at least 40 grams. 45 to 50 grams is better, but remember, there is a difference between obese and well nourished. So you don't want to push them with fat insects and push them too too far, weight gaining wise, because what happens then is also their liver can't cope with that. So reptiles usually, especially the insect eaters like leopard geckos, they are not used to handling a large amount of fatty foods. And of course, when we are breeding, we need to provide them with a more protein and more caloric rich based diet from time to time to ensure that they have the strength to do so. But always keep in mind, preparing your breeders for breeding and also keeping them during the breeding process, that you always watch them and their weight, and that you are staying away from feeding them too much and getting them obese, because it will decline fertility. It will lead to a ton of problems in the urogestinal tract, and the animals will not live a long and happy life. So
When
this
you
is
look at
something.
a leopard gecko, do you use the tail? Like, what are you using to? I'm sure you see pictures of obese leopard geckos all the time. Like, what are some of the standout things that like that leopard gecko has a weight issue?
Yeah. So as a rule of thumb, the tail should be have the thickness of a human thumb. So more or less, a little bit more is okay, but it shouldn't be
Did you say half
really
the
like.
thickness?
No,
Oh,
the
about the
thickness.
thickness, the
About
thickness.
the
Okay.
thickness of a human thumb. I'm not a native speaker, so please
Yeah. No worries.
hope
Yeah.
the audience understands and bears with me here. But also you just see it, and in some leopard geckos you can also see that the skin is suffering. They're having more of a loose skin, more of problems with getting a tight you know body conformation. So when you're holding the leopard gecko on your hand, it should feel muscular. It shouldn't feel like, it's wobbling around in your hands. So forcefully feeding them into growing fast is something that is really, really not contributing for their health. So we really want to stress that here.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So you said the 12 months. You've said somewhere between 40 and 50 grams, ideally above 45 grams, healthy weight, not obese weight. Are there other things, anything else that you watch for to make sure that the animal itself is ready to be paired?
Um, yeah, I said age, weight, and condition are the three key factors. And of course, you want to look into their genetic lineage, the informations that you have gotten with them to decide which geckos best to pair up with. And then I would say you're ready to go.
Okay, well then let's get through that. So, I mean, that just shows you how thorough this process is. I mean, we've been talking for maybe just under an hour or so, and we're just getting to the pairing part. So, if you again, I don't want to disparage other videos that go through this process, but if it starts with if the video you're watching starts with how to pair the leopard gecko, it's just not enough. There's not enough information there because there's so much that goes into it before pairing. So let's discuss the breeding process itself. Are you setting up ratios? How are you? I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah. So in general, a female male ratio for 2 to 3 females to 1 male is perfect. So basically, you're setting them up in breeding groups, or if you're keeping them separately, both sexes, there are also people who like to do that. You can setting them up just for the pairing and then, taking them out after pairing. But it's not so easy. So what we want to look for before we set the female with the male together is making sure she's ovulating. So if she's not ovulating, even if she's 2 years old and has never been paired, she's not ready to mate with that said male. So the way of doing that is, and that's also described perfectly in Ron Tramp's book, you can gently, if you have owned the trust of your leopard gecko, you can gently take her into your hand and bend her back a little bit over your hand, and then you're looking at her belly, and then you will see 2 pink follicles on the sides. So once you're able to discover them, you know that she's ready, in theory, to go with the male. And what you want to do, and what's always a good idea, especially for beginners, and especially also if you're dealing with a bloodline you have never worked with before and you really want to know something more about it, you want to put them in a neutral enclosure so they both will not feel that somebody else invaded their territory. So to avoid aggression and problems right from the start, you're setting up a neutral, like quarantine environment for this short moment. That's totally fine. You don't need anything fancy here, but just a terrarium or a rec system where they can, meet. Make sure they have plenty of hides and all the proper housing requirements. And then just observe, how is the male approaching? And I really want to go into detail here because it tells you so much that you can use later on. The male should be friendly. He shouldn't be pushy. He should show courting behavior like tail waving. There have this vibrating sounds that stimulates the female's response, and of course tongue licking following the female, but not in a aggressive way. Or in a laid-back way. So this is what I want to see for the males. Also, here's where you can really select for character. I exclude all males that are grabbing the female aggressively, are not, getting no for an answer. This is not something that we want to see, and this aggression is passed to the offspring.
So as soon as if you see that aggression in a male during the pairing process, which is pretty crazy to think because you've already gone through the whole selection process. He's been growing well, he's been eating well, he looks good, and then he gets into that moment, and the last thing he does, he messes it up, and he's out of it.
Well, bad for you, buddy. You're a good pet, but you're not a breeder. So this is also why sometimes it's good to buy 2 males and then, have one that as a reserve. You never know what happens. I also had one male ever in my whole history. He didn't want to breed. He just wasn't interested.
Really? Wow. Okay.
He was so relaxed. He
deselected himself.
Yeah, he deselected himself. Yes, basically. And you always also want to monitor how the female is responding to his courtship behavior. If she's responsive, if she's letting him approach and maybe lifting up the base of her tail and, letting him do his thing, then you know that this is a good pairing, that is perfectly fine and as nature, wants it to go. If she's hissing, if she's, really speeding away from him, also biting him to prevent him to come too close to her, she's either not ready or something is wrong with her. Especially with hot incubated females, sometimes we see that because too hot temperatures in incubation can lead to a kind of aggression and some displays of male-ish behavior in some leopard geckos, not all. So also very complex, topic. But to keep it simple, you want to monitor how the pairing is going, and you want to write down everything that you see for every animal. And this will also help you to see a progress in 2 or 3 generations or a decline. And then you can exactly also see where you did go wrong, and maybe, exchange the founder female for a different male that is also friendly, because let's hypothesize you have the perfect female, but the male, as you said, is just too aggressive. I've seen that with some animals that I bought from other stocks over the years. I mean, yeah, of course, if you can never know what you're getting into. Sometimes, especially the wild blood crosses are a little bit different and more skittish in general. And it led to a female badly being injured on her back. She had a huge wound. He ripped apart a quarter of her back in one swift move. I was so shocked to see that, and it happened so fast. It was many years ago when I was still so inexperienced. So this stuck with me over all the years, and it can happen. So we don't want that, and it has happened never again, because I made my adjustments and I tested the males and made sure that I'm there to watch the pairing and can, if necessary, remove the one or the other.
And I guess you probably have some accountability for the fact that if you are working with an animal that has more wild type blood in it, there's is there an allowance for a little bit more aggression in that scenario than something that's been line bred for years, or would you still cut them out if they're too aggressive?
I'm not measuring with the same extent, but I expect even the wild blood males to respect if a female clearly doesn't want to breed. It's okay for him to courtship her. It's okay for him to chase after her. And sometimes they need this push, like, no, get off my back. And normally that's when he's like, okay, whatever. I go into my corner and meet me when you're ready. So this is perfect example for behavior that is totally fine. But what I do not want to see definitely is a male chasing the female and getting so aggressive and so hyper-focused that he hurts her.
Now, what about can a female be deselected if she's too aggressive in that breeding process? Okay.
Always, sure. Same goes for the females. And since I've done that in the early years, I have now that's also why in the beginning I was talking about the huge variety that the leopard gecko species provides. The experience that I made in the beginning it feels like almost not the same species that I'm working with now, because I've selectively bred most of my lines for very tame behavior. I don't have those problems anymore. My animals could live together if they would want forever. And even the females, they are so tame to that point that they showing strongly reduced signs of territorial, behaviors and competition towards other females. So this is so fascinating. I was never expecting this. I was just, trying my best with the best of the animals in mind. My intention was just create an animal that is not so stressed when it has to be handled by his human caregiver. But what came out of it was so much more. It was a real new loophole into a rabbit hole, into a whole new world that led to leopard geckos that, for example, I can keep different than, animals from other lines that might be excellent in their own right and have all characteristics. They're not better or worse than those lines that I care for. It's just that those animals are a little bit more sensitive. They need their space, and they need to, maybe, a different setup and a more watchful eye than some of the lines that I'm working with. So this is really fascinating, and it shows that there's so much more to see, so much more to do in this topic.
Yeah, that is incredible. And I just want to jump back for one quick second, jumping back to ovulation before we get into the egg development and egg laying. A, how often do females actually ovulate? And then B, is there anything climate-wise or temperature-wise that leopard geckos need to go through, like a cycling, in order to induce either spermatogenesis or ovulation? Or they can, are we just basing it off of a natural cycle of ovulation from the female?
So in their natural behavior, in their natural habitat, they go through a colder period, so they do cycle. I know from some of my very respected and beloved colleagues in US that they manage perfectly fine without cycling them. So I think it's not a necessity. But for me, climate-wise, I don't have much of a choice. My animals, and this is also fascinating. No matter if I, cool them down or not, they always go, in this kind of winter sleep mode sooner or later, and let me know in their behavior they want colder temperatures.
Yeah.
And so I give it to them, of course. And with a more naturalistic approach, this is something that I feel they are really benefiting from. My personal experience is, especially if breeding female has gone through their first year of laying, and this is always a really stressful period because the organism is still young, a little bit growing and maturing still at that point. And then she's stressed for the very first time, producing those eggs and supporting her own body with calcium, supporting the eggs with enough calcium and minerals. So, and vitamins to get this all going, that I personally feel they look a little bit tired when I put them winter sleep, and it's always like a youth fountain. When they come out of it, they have bright colors again. They sometimes gain weight so quickly after hibernation. It's really like you pushed a button in their brain, and it's like, boom, go. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to see. And I've never seen a healthy gecko, by the way. So we want to make sure before we hibernate, of course, to send fecals and make sure we have healthy geckos that are fit for this trip. But I've never seen a healthy gecko not profiting from hibernation. So I can highly recommend it, and it has worked very well for me. By the way, something that I also want to mention before we leave this topic is care of males and females during the breeding process. So now let's say you've done this first pairing, and set the animals together at the first ovulation after you considered them ready for breeding. You can expect the female to ovulate around every 4 weeks approximately. You always want to monitor that because there are females who ovulate very steadily and they lay many eggs, and many of them are fertile, or you have bad breeders, females who struggle with eggs, producing infertile eggs, have egg laying troubles, and so on and so forth. You don't want to keep those in breeding. So especially when you experience that during the first year, this is a clear marker for you to please give her a home as a pet or rehome her in a pet-only environment, but do not stress her to reproduce. It will not get better. It's not getting any better. On the contrary. So if you, on the other hand, have a female that's doing fine, you can expect her in the first year to, as I said, being more stressed with laying eggs. And so you want to monitor her closely, and you want to make sure you're offering her a variety of feeder insects, and always keep in mind that she might need during this time a perfect calcium phosphorus relation that is provided, for example, by feeding Zophobas. This is the big brother of the mealworm, these worms that look like bigger mealworms.
Yeah, the superworms.
The superworms. They are excellent feeding source at this point for those females because they are providing, as I said, the perfect ratio while still being, calorie-wise, a good foundation. And you want to make sure also to give those females who are declining a little bit in weight some extra care. You can feed waxworms, for example, occasionally. Please not as a stable diet. Those are like sweets and sweet pies. Geckos love them. They die for them. They do almost everything for them. They will love you if you do so, but please use them wisely, but in those circumstances, it's a good idea, especially for younger females, to get them started to, make sure they're not losing too much weight. Again, keep in mind, you do not want her to get fat, but you definitely do not want her to drop in weight too fast. So with males, they need care too during the breeding process. Breeding can be very stressful. They forget to eat sometimes because they're so focused on, checking the territory for other potential males that could come in and, give them concurrence. So they want to keep the ladies to themselves. It is a good idea to give them a little break once in a while between pairings, not constantly overuse one male. Also for the genetic variety, it is also wise. I never have a breeding project with just one male and two females in order to secure a large gene pool, and rather incubate fewer eggs from different parents than incubate all eggs from one parent. And this also has the great advantage that I can have the luxury to give the females and also the males a break once in a while when they need it. Again, if you spot that an animal, no matter if male or female, drastically declines in weight, doesn't seem to do well, please do not pair them over and over again. Give them a break, set them aside, give them their own enclosure and a good monitor and some extra food and tender loving care, and get them back on track definitely before getting back into the breeding game.
So when they come out of their hibernation or their cooling period, and then they're awake and they're ready to go again, is that when you start the pairing? And then at that point, how often would you? Oh no, okay, because timeline wise, I guess we haven't really covered that. So maybe talk about like what month you pair, and then how often might you pair a female throughout the season, and how long is the season?
Interestingly, it really depends on the year, because the cycle here in Europe, it drastically in the last years, it drastically changed. So, for example, this season was very untypical and it was extreme. We had extremely cold weather. I usually hibernate from November, December to January, February. Also, I do not stick with just 8 weeks. If I feel the animals are healthy and they can endure it, I like to give them 2 to 4 weeks more if possible, usually, because I feel they greatly benefit from a slightly longer winter break, and it helps them to really recover. So once I in early spring or in the early start of the year, I decide to start a new breeding cycle, I slowly get the temperatures up again. Don't forget, guys, I have to look into my notes because in Europe we have Celsius and you guys have Fahrenheit. So let's see. We have 90 degrees Fahrenheit hotspot in the active period, and you definitely want those temperatures to drop significantly in the winter time. So I guess around 70-ish Fahrenheit. Does this make sense?
Yeah, 70. I have my chart here too. 70 is like 20, around 20 degrees
yeah,
Celsius.
A little bit lower. You want
so
it
into
to
the
be
high 60s
18,
probably.
Yeah, 20, 18 degrees Celsius. You
so
want
65-ish Fahrenheit.
Yeah, if you want to go for more secure, then 70-ish Fahrenheit is perfect. So you want to keep them at lower temperatures. And once, of course, naturally, to get them from 90 to 70, you just don't make a drop and then, suddenly get them in a cool room. They would die. What you do is you want to slowly, after breeding season, you want to slowly feed them to a point where they have recovered and building enough reserves, fat reserves, to safely go into winter sleep. Then you want to stop feeding them while still having the 90-degree Fahrenheit hotspot. That ensures that their whole digestive system can, empty fully. They really need to, fully release any food that they pass through their digestive system. Otherwise, it will mold because remember, during hibernation, all of the body functions are greatly reduced. So we are doing the same process in reverse. So we're slowly getting them into winter sleep. We are doing the winter sleep. And after that, we slowly dropping, raising the temperatures again. We are setting them in in their naturalistic terrariums and or most of us do the hibernation right there anyway. You will see that they are suddenly becoming more active. I have, still the calcium and then the calcium and the vitamins ready immediately when they wake up, so they can feed on that and refill their batteries, so to speak. And then I offer slowly some crickets or some roaches or whatever, and then they're starting eating again, and I'm feeding them for some time and watching them. And then usually it still takes in Europe a few weeks, I think around 8 to 12 weeks sometimes, until the females ovulate for the first time. And coming back to this year's craziness, we had constant 15 degrees Celsius until June.
Yeah. So that's the first a very 6 cold months, spring.
That is unimaginable. I've never experienced something like that. And the result was that all my females, they were active, but they were not ready to breed. They didn't ovulate, and they made no effort at all until the temperatures, significantly changed suddenly from one week to the other. And then we had, summer temperatures and increase of, I think, 10 to 15 degrees from one moment to the other. It was insane.
And I guess to make it clear, this is outside temperatures. You've increased the enclosure temperatures through the spring, but the outside is still cool. And exactly. I noticed that as well. Somehow the animals pick up on what's happening outside the walls.
They know. They always have, I have a, small computer controlled, heating systems here in place. So once they're out of winter sleep, they always have their 90-degree hotspot. They always have their cooler heights and everything that they need. And still, they get it. They knew it was not time for them, and they started breeding around June. So normally we start breeding in early spring.
Okay. So you got to work with what Mother Nature gives you. So
that can happen too, especially as a beginner. Don't panic. Just trust the animals. They will ovulate when they are ready and able and capable to do so, when they get the right cues. That I think it has to do that, with something in the air. I think that they sense that the temperatures outside are too cold for the eggs to survive. So maybe something like that is playing a role here. To be honest, we still don't know. There's still so much to be done scientifically about the species, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that.
Well, even if you pay attention to how you feel, I always keep our house at 21 degrees Celsius in the summer and the winter, and now it's getting colder. Like today, it's maybe minus 10, minus 11 degrees Celsius outside, and suddenly the inside 21 degrees feels cold, even though I know it's the exact same. Like in the summer, I'm wearing shorts and t-shirt, and now I'm putting on hoodies and sweatpants, even though it's the exact same temperature. There's something about just because you have this sense of the external environment as well. And I don't know if that's something that you're picking up innately, or who knows what it is, but surely the animals have the same system working in the background.
Sure. Yeah.
So you've paired the animals now, and so I guess my question was, how often do they ovulate? You said every 4-ish weeks once they're kind of back out into the summer temperatures, and then how often might you pair a female through the breeding season?
Oh well, that depends.
Let's just say your healthiest female.
Every second cycle, I would like to reintroduce her to the male, just to make sure that they are able to contain sperm for a while, but I want to make sure that they're having the best chances to get out fertile eggs, because one of the main reasons for egg laying problems, also known as
binding,
egg binding. Yeah, thank you. Egg binding is actually that they're laying infertile eggs which become too big to safely pass. And so this is something that I want to avoid at all costs. I want to make sure they have the best chances of laying fertile eggs. Also, with a regular introduction to the male, reintroduction to the male, I have, bigger chances watching over and over her behavior at that time, seeing a pattern. So was she just maybe unreceptive at the first try because she wasn't really ovulating and I was just, not seeing it, that maybe the follicles were too small, and so in the next cycle they were just perfect and she bred with him right away. This is also something that I want to write down and keep an eye on, and every pairing is also a chance to do that.
So when will she lay will she retain sperm in that month off? So let's just say you pair her in June and then you give her a break in July and then you pair her again in August. Would she potentially lay fertile eggs all 3 of those cycles? Or
Sure.
will the middle cycle always be an off month?
Theoretically, yes.
Okay.
So she should be.
How long from pairing to egg laying?
Mm-hmm. Usually something between 2 or 4 weeks.
Okay.
So it also depends. You can see it greatly depends from female to female. Every female has her own cycle, but this is, the time frame that you can expect.
And do you do anything special to support the female during the laying process? I mean, as far as climate or anything, and then maybe you could talk about the laying box or how you make sure that she finds a place to lay.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to emphasize here. Egg laying box, a correct egg laying box is vital, because otherwise they could contain the eggs or laying them at a place where you can't find them. And then they're easily, they're soft shelled eggs. So they're, prone to drying out if you don't collect them and save them. In the nature, usually females walk around and they lay 1 clutch of eggs, so 2 eggs at a time at different places. And let's say if a gecko female in the wild is laying 10 eggs, so 5 clutches, let's say that maybe she doesn't have a cricket every day, so she's laying 5 clutches instead of the 10. That is a maximum. So we can expect not all eggs to hatch, because some of them will have perfect conditions and others not. We don't want to do that, of course. We want to save those eggs and we want to put them in an incubator. But before doing that, we need to make sure that the female has best chances of laying, and she's doing that in a specific box. You can use an ice cream box where you put a hole on the lid, or there are also special egg laying box available in the pet market. Whatever you use, make sure that it's big enough for her, that she can easily access it and enters it, and also make sure that you put either sphagnum moss or moist cocos substrate in it, so the eggs are well protected. The key always is to have a fluffy and moist substrate that is not too wet, because too much water can easily, lead to mold in the eggs. You also don't want it to dry, because then, of course, the eggs will dry out. So go for a good ratio and look that it's moist but not dropping wet of water. And then once you find them, you can, take the box out and then carefully set the eggs in a specialized reptile incubator.
Okay, well, so let's talk about the incubation now. You've collected the eggs. You have a bunch of fertile eggs. What's the next step?
Well, the essence of a successful incubation is using a stable and quality incubator that provides you with stable temperatures. You want to avoid homemade incubators that have temperature fluctuations. I don't say that all homemade incubators are bad. There are very talented people who build amazing incubators, but maybe where they're either very talented or other hand very experienced, or both. So if you are a new breeder, what we assume here, please only buy a homemade incubator from someone who has been known and made a name for, having a quality that you can, work with. Or otherwise, what I always recommend is, just buy one of the quality ready-to-use incubators that are out on the market. There are different incubators in different sizes, also different prices, but here, a little investment goes a long, long way. And if I have to invest into something, I would invest into really quality animals and a good housing and also a good incubation. I see no sense at all to spend a fortune for naturalistic, beautiful terrariums and, expensive, beautifully structured breeders just to save some money in the incubator and then end up with a bunch of problems. Some of those problems can include eggs, molding, eggs dying, or abnormalities in the hatchling. So we typically can see some eye deformities or spine deformities right out of the egg when temperatures are too much fluctuating. So please make sure that you're using a quality machine that provides you with a more or less stable incubation temperature.
Do you use a reptile-specific incubator, or do you? Because I'm sure there's
Yes.
lots of chicken ones or bird ones that might work. You use reptile-specific, okay?
I use a reptile incubator, and that's also my tip. In the ball python market, they are the smallest ones. They go very well and fine and a long way for leopard gecko breeders. So snake incubators, they are usually very high quality because snake eggs are much more sensitive to the environment than leopard geckos. Leopard geckos do hatch under the crazy circumstances, but as always, especially as a beginner, you're playing with the devil. So in order to prevent, problems that you don't know how to deal with, I really recommend going into the snake incubating sections and select one of the incubators there. I'm so happy with them. I have decided, especially since I'm here in the European climate zone with hot summers and cold winters, I've decided for one incubator that is able to cool and to warm at the same time and who distributes the whole temperature evenly throughout the whole incubation. So the incubator. So this is really important.
Yeah, in the long run, it's probably much cheaper just to invest in a quality incubator than to try to play the odds of the temperature fluctuation, then losing animals or coming out with you could have a perfect animal that would have been great, but now has eye issues because of the fluctuating temperatures. Just go do the right thing and buy a proper incubator. So can you talk to us about how long the eggs are in the incubator, the temperature and humidity, the climate conditions?
Yeah. So leopard gecko eggs are... The sex of leopard geckos is determined by the incubation temperature, so which is a really special thing for this species and a few other species of reptiles. So you can basically decide whether you want to incubate males or females. So males hatch at higher temperatures, the females hatch at lower temperatures, and usually, of course, the males being on the hotter, warmer side, they hatch sooner than the females. For the males, it's approximately lasts up to 4 weeks when you incubate them at the maximum temperature, and for the females, it can last up to 8 weeks.
Okay. Wow, so that's quite a difference. And as you had mentioned earlier, if you have a higher temperature egg and it happens to hatch out as a female, you may start pulling some aggressive male behaviors within that female gecko itself. So you probably have a bit of a mix.
It can happen, but usually, especially, with the genetics that I have worked with, also with the genetics that I acquired, that is not homebred by me, it is very, very rare. I've rarely seen it, but I just want to mention it. It can happen. So it's always good to be prepared and have this in the back of your mind that it can happen, actually.
So when you set up your incubator, is it actually kind of partitioned to these are going to be the males and these are going to be the females? Or
Yes.
do you, okay,
Yes.
so you decide that beforehand.
One of the great advantages that this incubation method gives us is to evaluate the market. And by evaluating the market, of course, it differs from season to season and from your projects, but for a beginner, it is safe to say that females sell easier than males. So if you're a beginner, I highly recommend tackling for females. You will always get, nature finds its way. You will naturally most probably have the one or other male emerge from this female only incubation group, but that's fine. And that's what you just expected. And this one or two extra males won't cause you much harm, because either you can use them for yourself or you can give them away in good caring hands. But you definitely want to avoid, especially as a beginner, incubating exclusively for males, or, overdoing your male ratio.
Okay. And then temperature-wise, you mentioned the 4 weeks for the males, 8 weeks for the females. What temperature range for the? Let's start with the males first, and then you can tell us what you incubated the females at.
Yes. So I have to look for the Fahrenheit. Sorry. So 80 till 82 Fahrenheit will get you mostly females, while 88 to 90 Fahrenheit will get you mostly males. So.
And if you incubate somewhere in the middle, is it kind of a 50-50 ratio type thing?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And then humidity-wise, is there anything you pay attention to there? Or
yeah,
because
sure.
Okay.
You definitely want the humidity to stay something between 70 to 80%. I always have a hygrometer and a thermometer in my incubator to make sure that I track those, those things. And you can easily get this humidity by slightly spraying and moistening the incubation material. Something that has proven to be very successful is vermiculite or perlite. I personally use perlite because I like it. It doesn't stick so much as vermiculite, but that's totally, decision of personal taste and preference. As a beginner, it's safe to try both, and then, go with the one that you feel you can manage the moisture level best. And taking care not to making it too wet is very crucial to prevent molding eggs from the start.
Right. Okay. So now we have all the way now to the point where our eggs are starting to hatch, and we have tiny little hatchlings. And what do we do to support these little guys?
So, first and most important thing, and this is so logical to me, but I need to bring this up. Please do not help your baby geckos to hatch. They're fully capable of doing this. Please don't cut your eggs. Those are not ball pythons. They will not survive when they are ready. The egg will start to sweat a little. It will, get. You will see a little bit of. You will see that the egg will have the appearance of being a little bit sunken in, and then usually that's when the little one will make its appearance very soon. So just take your time, be patient. They are, usually hatching at night, interestingly. And so when I check the incubator every day in the morning, this is the nicest thing to see what has hatched over the night. And some are still, in the egg, and only the head is, looking out. So give them the time. They definitely will do this on their own. And once they're fully out of the egg and are running around, you definitely want to put them in out of the incubation boxes and into a simple baby setup where you give them the first 24 to 48 hours to absorb the egg yolk that they're still feeding on, but provide them with a simple setup. Please use here paper towel to avoid any sand impaction. We want to keep the baby station as simple as possible. It's like with newborn babies and every other species of animals, newborns are a little bit delicate, and we want to give them a nice start. So the basic is a humid hide and a water very shallow water dish, so they can't, get into trouble there, and a small dish with mealworms or other feeder insects that are gut loaded, and calcium.
Okay. And then how long do you kind of keep them in a fairly simple environment until you feel like they're robust enough to maybe move to something a little? And also, are they together in an enclosure at that first stage, or are they separated already?
That depends on personal preference. I usually never put more than two into one enclosure. I have the feeling that if you raise them for the first weeks, if you raise them single, they will not eat as good and as stable as when they have one sibling. We're talking here about the first 4 to 8 weeks, because it stimulates a little bit, that sense of, oh, that there is food and somebody else is eating my food, so maybe I should go grab your cricket or worm. So that really helps getting them going. But once they are stable and have grown a little bit, you want to put them periodically in bigger enclosures. So I know in US, rec keeping is done until adulthood. We now in Europe more or less do it until they are well settled in and they are above 20 grams. So they have, a little bit of fat reserves, definitely, to get used to the new surrounding and do not, decline in the other environment, because that's what you have to see. And that's also one of the beginner's mistake in Europe, at least. People meaning well and putting newborn leopard geckos, 10 of them, in a big terrarium with sand and everything, and then wondering why the little ones die. So they are not ready to do this. In nature, it's a natural environment, yes, but in nature, if in the wild 10 leopard gecko babies hatch, not all of them would survive. So we have to keep that in mind. Nature doesn't really care if the individual, is perfectly fit of going after the cricket right from the start, but we as breeders have the responsibility to do so. So what we want to do is, instead, we want to provide them with a very minimalistic environment where they can slowly adapt and get into this world and learning how to catch small prey items. And naturally, the smaller the space at the very beginning, at the hatching state, the lesser chance there is that the prey items will just walk away and they can't get after them. So for the first 4 to 8 weeks, at least, I want to have an environment where they can slowly learn how to hunt. And after that, you can also see that the first feedings, there is a stable growth rate, and if they decline a little bit, that's also a sign for me, okay, now they're ready for a bigger enclosure. And then usually, the speed increases again. So of course, if you're keeping leopard geckos in a too smaller container for too long of time, that's not animal friendly, and it doesn't help with the growth rate. So what we want to do is, as always, we want to keep a close eye and watching the individual. And once the individual is ready, we move it to a bigger container. And after 20 grams, we definitely move it from a more sterile and safe environment to the more naturalistic habitats.
Okay, that's perfect. Now, are there any other egg laying or hatching issues that people run into that you see that you think are worth mentioning, to just give people something to watch out for if they've, this happened to me, I don't know?
Yeah, I think loose substrate is a really big challenge, and one of the main reasons for losing youngsters, at least in Germany and in Europe. I think also what can be tricky is to go the step from, I just cared about my 1 or 2 breeding animals, to now I have a bunch of babies. We have to remember leopard geckos are very fertile. They can lay up to a maximum of 20 eggs per season. Usually for first-time female, it's 8 to 10 eggs, and after then it's 15 to 20 eggs. And then, of course, if we have done everything correct, we are now sooner or later confronted with a bunch of youngsters, and caring for 50 leopard geckos is not as easy as caring for 2 leopard geckos. So
Mhm.
I think this is the greatest challenge, doing the switch from a hobbyist keeper taking care of his beloved pet to managing a colony. And this is exactly what you're doing when you go into breeding. You're managing a colony. And if you're embracing this thought, and with the respect and, of it that comes with it, you will see where you have to make the right steps into that direction. So, as I said, data keeping here also helps me to keep on track, because I can't remember with 50 or 100 or 200 animals, with the big breeders, of course, yeah, especially. You can't remember everything about every baby. And especially as a beginner, even 10 babies might be overwhelming. But with those data, um, it calms you down. It gives you a solid workflow that you can follow, an easy recipe to follow. And if you have the feeling that something is not right, you can go back and you're like, okay, hatchling number 1 is growing excellent, but there's something wrong with hatchling number 3. Is it related? Does it come from the same group? What's the reason? So maybe you find out, oh, okay, like I said, it's just hatched as one of the latest in the season. So maybe I shouldn't be too worried. I give it more time. Or on the other hand, the sibling that hatched first is now the same size than the sibling that hatched last. So I want to have a good, keen eye on sibling number 1, and giving him a little bit extra care and extra food, and then seeing if he picks up. And if he doesn't, I know that this is not a candidate that I could give away or keep as a breeding prospect, for example.
Yeah. And okay, that's perfect. And then as far as the loose substrate goes, is that just there's a risk of impaction when they're first born that's just not worth taking? That's where so you're just doing paper towel, I think you said, but that's probably something that commonly happens, taking a mouthful of something and dying.
Yeah. And also, if something isn't right with a baby from the start, you have the same advantage as in the quarantine system. You can always take fecal samples, send it to your vet, and make sure that maybe the reason is, that you have to use a deworming medicament to help them get rid of internal parasites, for example. And you want to be aware of that. You want to be definitely able to also work with your vet and make sure that you have everything under control.
Okay. So I think we've discussed elements of raising babies and keeping them as they're young. Is there anything else we wanted to add? I did want to talk to you about just socializing them as they're young to make sure they're getting used to you as a keeper and doing that in a way that doesn't stress them out. So we'll definitely talk about that. Is there anything else you want to add to just keeping them as youngsters? Or should we jump into the socialization?
Many things, but I don't want to keep it too, overwhelming here. But I think we're good at that point. And if there's any more demand, of course, we can go back into that in greater detail in another episode.
Sure. Yeah. So let's talk about the socializing them and getting them used to you as the keeper.
Yeah, sure. So what I like to do is I always want to socialize them as soon as possible, but still I give them enough time to settle in. And as you said, it's crucial to not stress them out. So have patience. Once they're in their environment, I just lay my hand into the enclosure. I let them approach. I am very careful to make very calm and gentle movements. I avoid, making anything that would look like a bird of prey or something about their heads, because that is their natural fight, when their natural fight or flight response is kicking in their natural habitat. Of course, one of the biggest enemies are birds of prey, for example, and also other reptiles, of course. And so they're very aware on movements above their head. So I want to make sure that I'm in a calm state of mind when I approach them, and I give me that little extra second to gently handle everything. And once they are approaching a little bit, I can try to, taking them up. And what I want to do is I want to form a cave with my hands around the gecko when I have to carry him or when he's in my hands, so he feels safe and secure. What I never want to do is, especially with a young gecko, I never want to hold it on my hand like that and then, go around the room, because this is a safe bet then that he will jump sooner or later. And just
So you
make
want
sure
to kind of
that
remove some of that visuals around in the environment by making a little cup with your hands, basically.
Yeah, and also preventing him from jumping and hurting himself. I think this is the most important thing. And then I can, increase the amount of time that I'm handling that gecko. And if the gecko shows significant signs of stress, like hissing and, other things, attacking you, sometimes they're you can see that their chin is having a higher frequency. That's when they are alert.
Yes,
they will look directly at you. Then the next step is that they lift themselves up a little bit on their feet to make them appear a little bit bigger. And if I see that, I know that a hiss is coming. So I don't really need to approach this animal. I will just leave it be. I will try again tomorrow, and I will just give him the idea that there's nothing to be afraid about when I'm handling stuff around him. So this has proven to be very effective.
Yeah, those are some great tips. And I think it's really hard to actually conceptualize how huge we are compared to them. I mean, that's like, we're giant things that are picking them up. And so it's important to be slow, be patient, and know that it's not a process that's going to take 2 iterations, right? It's a long-term thing at getting them habituated to you.
And fun fact, they recognize my voice. I'm always telling them, hey, it's all right, buddy. It's just me. I'm just repeating the same sentence over and over again in exactly the same melody. And so that also helps them to recognize me from other people and really getting comfortable with me. And as always, I think I heard this in a podcast talk discussion with some top snake breeders. They kind of sense when you're nervous versus when you're cool. So if I want to work with babies, if I'm in a rush, or if I just, I'm very upset because something happened, I really take my time to calm down before I approach the babies, because they definitely will notice that.
Yeah. Yeah, just like any dogs or horses, they pick up on when the human is uncomfortable as well. Well, that was a lot of information. We've gone through. Oh, go ahead.
Most important thing last, never pick a leopard gecko by its tail. Please don't do it, especially not the babies, and in general, never ever. Leopard geckos can drop their tails, and it's not good for them.
How often do you deal with a gecko that's dropped its tail?
So rarely, 1 in 5 years.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
So almost never.
In my line. So what I said, what is so fascinating, while we're talking about all this general stuff, I was constantly reminded that what I told you and what is the best advice in general sometimes differs a lot from my experience that I have today in my day-to-day work, because the lines are genetically, also from their behavioralism, different from what I had 15 years ago. So I hope we could, make that bridge, but always keep in mind, this can also appear to you, listener. Your leopard geckos might have their individual, needs and their ways of communicating with you. Be open and just approach them with an open mind. And when you make your notes and observe them over time, you will really get a chance to connect on a complete other level with them, and exactly give them what they need and what they want from you.
Yeah. Well, I feel like this definitely gives people a really good foundation. And like you said, there's going to be some slight nuance here, especially because the animals that you've been working with are the animals that you've been crafting over the past 15 years. So now you're working with a product that is essentially curated by you, and there's some slight differences. But I feel like the information you shared today is just going to be so valuable to people. I would love to finish off with just some of your own experiences breeding. I mean, you have such a breadth of experience as far as working with this specific species. Are there certain things over the past 15 years that jump out as highlights for you, or memorable things, or things that you feel like are things that we haven't discussed yet today, but that are important for people to hear?
Oh, so many, so many. When you're like me working with not only the modern and top-notch animals. I mean, of course, it's always cool to have a gecko, to find a gecko in your incubator that you know, oh, that's very sought after and that's new. But this has turned completely for me a few years ago when I focused more on conservation breeding. So now my most emotional moments, it's always emotional to see an animal hatch because this is life that was created, and I cherish every life. And no matter if a normal gecko or a fancy gecko is born, I welcome and I love and I cherish them all the same. But it is undeniable the sense of pure joy and emotions, this mix of emotions when you have a baby gecko looking at you and you know that this gecko comes from a bloodline that's almost lost, and due to circumstances that we also discussed in previous episodes, and even maybe the breeder is not even alive anymore, or he couldn't continue his work, and now you have his or her genetic legacy sitting and looking directly into your soul, and this is a goosebump moment that I never expected. That for me is the greatest joy ever, seeing the past, you know, and hold for the future. And these beautiful animals that were always forgotten, still walking the earth today, and
Yeah.
getting more and more people really more interested in them and wanting to work with them. This is amazing, and always something that makes me very emotional.
Well, and that's what's on the table for people who want to jump into the breeding world, right? Those are the types of experiences you can have. And that's why it's important it's a much more rich and there's a more depth to the experience when you go about it the more thorough way, like we've described here today, because you'll have those experiences where you're, rekindling lines of animals that maybe are kind of becoming genetically disturbed by people just breeding willy-nilly type thing. So despite all of this seeming like way more work, it's not as simple as going to the PetSmart and buying 2 animals and then breeding them. There's so much more reward that you get out of it as the breeder when you do it this way.
Sure. And also, if you have a vision, you can end up in the most unexpected and wonderful places. I remember that I always had a passion for the purple color on a leopard gecko. It's called lavender. It's one of the hardest colors to breed because it's not a color per se, and it is easily covered by other color pigments such as yellow, orange, black, etc. And so my only goal forever has been I like geckos with as much purple as possible. And so I started breeding, and I remember that the all purple gecko was one of the holy grails in leopard gecko breeding. And as much as the blue leopard gecko, which hasn't been born yet and probably maybe never will. We don't know. But what I know for sure is I'll never say never again, because people were telling me all the years, oh, Rebecca, forget it. It's too much work. You will never get an all purple gecko. And that was my goal. So I didn't care, and I didn't really follow that path per se. I just wanted to create those beautiful animals that expressed the color as best as possible. And for the first 5 years, almost nothing happened. And I'm sure it must have looked frustrating to others, but I was really, passionate about where I was going. I was taking it slow. I was really thinking about, okay, I could go the quick road, but then the animals would have been heavily inbred, and I didn't want that. So, of course, I took the longer road. And after 5 to 6 years, you could see the progress. Bam, 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 after generation, they just doubled in their coloration. And just when I thought it couldn't come any better, I looked in the incubator, and I never forget this day. And I screamed so loud that everybody in the house was coming because they thought I had an accident. A purple gecko looked back at me. It was, or at least the color that I knew turned purple.
Yes,
and
yeah.
It was this grayish dark purple that I knew turned bright purple after a few sheds. And I was remembering holding this gecko in my hands, and I was like, who are you? And how is this possible? So Leopard geckos offer so many beautiful possibilities to express your creativity without, um, flooding the market with a species that can't be, taken care of properly or that requires a lot of space. You have a customer base that you can more or less approach easily, if you know what you're doing and if you're producing in decent numbers. So I think doing this is ensuring, and breeding responsible is ensuring, we do not need animals from the wild, no matter if we are lovers of colors and patterns or if we, really enjoy the original wild stuff. Both is fine. And I've worked with both. And I'm also using, as we already discussed, the wild bloodlines to ensure that my animals stay healthy and robust. And I think, yeah, there's so much possibilities out there to get people into the hobby and making them aware of an animal that they can care for, they can love, that doesn't require, as much room as maybe a rabbit, or live longer than a hamster and don't have fur and are, willing to cooperate with you and yeah, live their best life as a pet. So
Well, and I think what's important about that story is the purple line. Is it the lavender or the lilac? I always forget.
it's lilac. Yeah,
It's the lilac.
we wanted to set that. We saw that they were something completely different from the normal lavenders that we had. So I was branding. I've never been a fan of branding lines before you haven't done your work for a significant amount of time. But after, breeding them since 2005, we branded the best lavender line from my stock as ultra lavenders. And then we had the side of project, and we were like, yeah, what do we do now? So a colleague of mine, blessed us with the idea and inspiration to name them lilacs.
Okay, yeah. So if anyone wants to see those, they can look at those on your Instagram page. But the most important part about that story is that you were patient. You weren't in a rush to do it. You had this goal, and you did it in the way that didn't produce a bunch of animals with a ton of genetic depression issues by inbreeding and inbreeding and inbreeding. You did it the right way, the patient way. You didn't end up with a bunch of animals that had nowhere to be, and like no homes, and animals that aren't healthy. And because of that process that we've talked about, the being critical with the animals that you choose to breed, I'm sure you could have created a lilac a lot earlier on in that process. It just wouldn't have been a healthy, robust lilac that can now be a foundation moving forward. So it's an important part of the story.
Exactly. And the other side of the story, that was my message, is a species that has been talked about so often and that people seem to be boring still offers so much opportunity. It's in your hands to choose the projects, the bloodlines you're truly burning for. And you don't have to go with everything that every other, breeder is doing. You don't have to get into the morph that is most popular on morph market right now. You have and should have the choice of carefully selecting what you seem worthy, and you can over time, with patience and knowledge, shape and create your own lines. But you can also, what I find most rewarding, and hold what treasures we already have from the past for the future, and getting really good feedback for that, and helping the community to provide the market with healthy and strong animals from proven and beautiful genetics.
I think that is perfectly said. Rebecca, this is amazing as always. The amount of information you share is just, it's crazy. Every time I record an episode with you, I think, how could we do another one? Because it just feels like you've told me everything that you could possibly say. And then we do another 2 hours, a year later, a few months later. It's just incredible. People will still want more information from you. What's the best ways for the audience to either stay in touch with you or learn more about your philosophies?
Sure. We're working on finally an update on my homepage. It's www.dragoongecko.com, or for now, until this is been done, you can find all my work on Instagram at Dragoon Gecko. Everything together. And of course, for all of those who are interested in keeping up with what I, have to offer on Offspring, you're free and, welcome to, subscribe to our free newsletter. It's the only way to get our animals, because we usually have more demand and a lot of international people that we place them with, and we usually do not, produce so much, especially this year, as we welcomed a new family member to our human team here at Dragoon Gecko. We significantly produced, less leopard geckos, and we usually don't produce many each year. So, for all of you who want to get some infos and their hands on some of my geckos, this is the best way to reach out. I think the link is in the show notes, where you can subscribe, and then you'll be first to be noticed when some animals are available.
Now, the offspring that end up in the newsletter, are those animals that you deem, or maybe you can't deem because they're still too young, but do you deem those as breeders, or is that for the people purchasing them to buy to figure out? Okay.
No, this is usually breeding quality. And as I said, should something happen, what really rarely happens, I'm more than happy to offer, a great customer service and figure out where the problem is and how we approach that. I also offer for some high-end animals a free genetic coaching session that I usually only offer on a paid basis, to make sure that my clients really get a deep understanding what they're getting, what they're working with, and helping them turning their goals into reality, really helping them approach what they have in their mind.
What about the pet quality animals that you produce? Do you just sell those locally? How do you move those? Maybe that's what one last tip we can finish off for people. You end up with animals that shouldn't be bred. How do you sell those?
Yeah, usually those are very few, because we selectively, decreased those numbers significantly through the breeding program. But of course, there are always a few that I don't think will make good breeders, or that are, side projects from our breeding groups, and those are usually sold at the ham show locally. So
okay.
December ham show is coming soon for us from all people from Europe. You're welcome to check our table there. And usually for the high-end stuff, the next newsletter is coming out at the beginning of December, and the next one will be coming out in March. So,
okay. Awesome. Well, Rebecca, as always, it's a complete pleasure having you on the show, and I'm sure we'll have the comments about requesting for part 4, so we'll do that at some point in the next year, I'm sure. Thank you so much for being here, and I cannot wait for the next one already.
Thank you, Dylan. As always, it's been a great privilege and pleasure being here, talking about all aspects about leopard geckos. May it be, more focused on the basic like today, or like in the past, more at other important factors, and dive deep into. So thank you so very much again having me here, and I'm looking forward to next time.
No, my pleasure. All right, that is the end of the episode. Rebecca, thank you so much for being a guest again. I already cannot wait for part 4, because there's just so much to talk about with you. And for the listeners listening, afterwards, Rebecca and I talked for maybe 20 or 30 minutes, and we already came up with 2 potential episodes for the future. So we'll make sure that those happened at some point soon, because there's just so much in Rebecca's head that I want to make sure we can share with everybody, because it's all very valuable stuff. If you are somebody who wants to get into leopard gecko breeding, or breeding of any species of any kind, especially if you're talking about color mutations and morphs, then this episode is something that you need to listen to. So hopefully you got some value out of it. I know you will have. Please share it on social media. That's one really easy way you can help support the podcast. If you're looking for more information on the show, you can head to animalsathome.network.com. You can also support the podcast over at patreon.com/animalsathome. And I think that is it for this one, everybody. I will catch you in the next episode.